Good evening, everyone. My name is Chris LeBron. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Travis. Thank you for the coalition hosting this today. I actually haven't been in an in-person forum since 2018, when I had the privilege of running No on 2 and 3 with outgoing Assembly Member Dick Godfrey, former Borough President Gail Brewer, now Councilman Gail Brewer. So it's a little otherworldly to be in this room because we've been in Zoom boxes this entire time. My quick bio: I'm born and raised in Hell's Kitchen, born and raised in the district. Originally, I worked in advertising. I left advertising, committed myself to housing advocacy and tenant organizing. After my landlord utilized multiple apartments, there was a massive flood in my home, destroying personal documents and effects. And I had decided that enough was enough. It was time to reform. It was time for change. So I successfully created the West 47th Street Tenants Association, getting my neighbors to trust somebody who they knew as a child. I've represented you on Manhattan Community Board 4 for the last 6 years. I've served on the Arts, Culture, Education, and Street Life Committee, the Waterfront Parks and Environment Committee, the Clinton Hell's Kitchen Zoning Land Use Committee, where we have discussed intimately what is being built in Midtown West, Hell's Kitchen, and Hudson Yards, and offering wherever possible our guidance and expertise to Chelsea Land Use Committee. My last title was Policy Director for the Public Housing Chair of the New York City Council. Prior to that, I was only a fellow. I went from earning a full-time salary to making $15 an hour and having a bartender make ends meet. But the Black, Latino, Asian Caucus, I got to work with the majority of the City Council, ensuring that we had full funding for the 2020 census count, that we had funding for education on ranked choice voting, and organizing with labor and partners of labor. I'm running because this district means everything, truly everything. And so I've given up my life to be a full-time candidate, and I'm proud to have the endorsement of the local Democratic Club, the Hell's Kitchen Dems. I'm proud to have the endorsement of Tenant Association leaders from the top of Hell's Kitchen, and even on the west side, Upper West Side, by Central Park, all the way down to Chelsea. I'm your tenant organizer. I'm exactly who you raised, and I'm the beneficiary of your hard work. And I'm looking to represent you in Albany to continue that path forward and to improve our quality of life here in the district. Thank you.
And my name is Joe Mafia. I thank the Coalition for the Hell's Kitchen Neighborhood Coalition for inviting me to participate. This is my first debate, so I look forward to. I've got some seasoned veterans here. I am a native of New York. I'm a product of New York City. I was born in Spanish Harlem, played stickball and basketball on the Upper West Side, raised by a single mom from the islands. Did graffiti, became the king of the #1 train. Went to Powell Memorial Academy High School, found track and field in my junior year. Track and field saved my life. I got a scholarship to Iona College, studied accounting, became a CPA, worked for Main Herdman, which was the 9th largest accounting firm in the world, predecessor firm to KPMG. Then went on to work for Gulf and Western in Columbus Circle, now called Paramount Pictures. After Paramount, I went to Don King Productions, the boxing promoter during the Tyson years. And then after that, I started my own firm, a 2-partner, 10-person accounting firm, Rosenzweig and Mafia. We merged. My partner, David Rosenzweig, and I merged that firm into Janover, the firm I'm at now. I've helped grow that firm to one of the top accounting firms in the city, about to break the top 100 in the country. I achieved some professional success while at Janover and the Rosenzweig and Mafia. I also teach in the graduate program at Hunter College and undergraduate program as well. And now I will be your next Assembly District Member. I can't wait to talk about some of the issues in the district, particularly crime, the economics of New York State, as well as my vision for the district in terms of arts and culture.
Hello, everyone. Apologies to these guys sitting next to me. Someone tell me this is too loud. But my name is Harrison Marks. Thank you to the coalition for hosting us. As you heard, this is our first in-person debate of this whole season. I'm quite excited. I never knew that Chris was wearing speakers under his suit, but now I know because we're live. So we learn something new every day. So my name is Harrison Marks. I am a lifelong New Yorker. I served in the Obama administration doing regulatory policy. I'm a lawyer by training. I'm a business advisor by experience, helping companies grow and helping them invest in their workforces. And most recently, I worked with the governor's office on the Reimagine New York Commission, which the governor set up to advise on how to make our state better during the pandemic and beyond. I was our staff lead on workforce development, support for small businesses, and support for the arts. So that's my experience. Let me tell you a little bit about why I'm running for this position right now. And really there's two reasons. Number one is as the commission, the Reimagine New York Commission wound down in the spring of 2021, I left that experience a little bit disappointed by the balls that the state had dropped and by the quality of the work that the state was doing to help us during the pandemic. I stewed on that for a couple of months, and then my wife gave birth to our son, Henry, this past summer, and that's the second reason why I'm running. After Henry's birth, I became increasingly frustrated by the state of our neighborhood, by the trash piling up, by the feeling of unsafety in the streets, by the ridiculously expensive housing costs, especially when you're raising a family. And I learned that rather than continue to complain to my wife, continue to get frustrated, I could do something about it. And so the reason why I'm running to be your next assembly representative is that I think our neighborhood's got a lot of problems. I have the experience in state government to make me believe that I will be a more competent policymaker to help solve those problems. And I believe that my experience at the federal level, at the state level, in the legal industry, and in business will enable me to bring all of that to be a better, more proficient, more competent policymaker for us and our neighborhood. If elected, the three major things that I want to focus on immediately are that we need to make our housing more affordable in this district, we need to make our streets safer, and we need to fill in all the vacant storefronts that have cropped up over the last several years. I think now is the moment to send a competent, experienced policymaker to Albany, rather than Albany as usual, and that is what I bring to the table here. That's why I'm running, that's who I am, and I look forward to our discussion over the next couple of hours. Thank you.
Tony Simone. Good evening. Thank you to the coalition, and to my neighbors for hosting this forum tonight in person. It's kind of cool being in the same room together, even in a hot room like tonight. I'm Tony Simone. I was raised by a Peruvian immigrant mom. My dad was a taxi cab driver, working class family. They owned a small restaurant. Growing up, times weren't always easy. Faced addiction, bad landlords, you name it. My grandfather was a Teamsters Union delegate. They all taught me to always get back to your community. They taught me that public service is a noble cause. My grandfather, particularly, another Tony, a lot of Tonys in the county. He said, "You never do anything in life alone. You will only solve complex problems like he did for his workers by fighting for inconvenience for them collectively in broad, diverse coalitions. And I've done that my entire adult life serving the West Side communities, whether it was at New York City Council as a director of external affairs, stopping the West Side Stadium, not alone, but working with my neighbors, the Block Association Community Board, when I was on the Community Board for land use, working on affordable housing plans. Like Joe and other leaders have led from the start on having real, true middle income housing for all New Yorkers, or whether it was when I worked at Hudson River Park Friends creating open park space. It took 20 years to get the tow path off of Pier 76, but we did it together. I led that effort for Hudson River Park Friends with folks like Roll Curtis, and so many others, and from the inside. What I stand out, I think, for my opponents is I've worked inside and outside of government in this district. I know my neighborhoods like the back of my hand. I can walk across the street right now into the office and I don't need on-the-job training. And that's why I am proud to have the endorsement of the incumbent Dick Godfrey, who I worked closely with when Hudson River Park was first created, when I worked at the state Senate, late Catherine Abate, when folks didn't even imagine the beautiful park. And decades later, I have a little bit of gray hair and we have a beautiful waterfront park. And I've also worked with broad coalitions to get tough things done. When marriage equality was just a dream and folks said it'll never happen, we set the foundation. But I didn't just work with LGBT activists, I worked with local store owners. I worked with folks that most people didn't think of reaching out to, and the second time we made it pass. Yes, the governor had a lot to do with it, we set the foundation. And we talked to Republican senators, Democratic senators. I'm a coalition builder. I'm the one in this race who works with everyone, regardless of where you stand. And if I'm fortunate enough to be elected to council, your assembly member, I will also work on issues most important to this church. First, public safety. We have a public safety problem. Affordable housing. We need to make sure the middle class are not priced out of the west side. And thirdly, healthcare for all means healthcare is a human right. We learned that from the pandemic to be a more livable, healthier, safer for every New Yorker, not just the ones.
Thank you for the question. And I couldn't agree more that our neighborhood needs to feel safer than it is. I was walking out of a coffee shop on 8th Avenue and 21st Street, a little bit south of Hell's Kitchen, but in Chelsea. And a fight broke out on the street. Someone threw coffee at someone else right next to my wife and me, and I'm just grateful that we didn't have our son with us. This was just a couple weeks ago. Last week, the Chelsea Community News published an article about this section of our neighborhood. And according to what I read in the newspaper, there are people who are stealing packages from residents that are delivered to their doorsteps, selling those packages to a deli for cash, stolen goods, and then using that cash to go back out onto the street and buy drugs right on that same block. It's its own little ecosystem. The police know about this. Eric Boccia knows about this. Alvin Bragg, RDA, came to the block just a few days ago, and no one can solve this problem. So it is a critically important question. The other thing that's really important about the Midtown South precinct, by the way, is not only is crime higher than elsewhere in the city, it's higher. It is notably higher than it was 2 years ago. I believe crime rates in aggregate have increased by more than 100%, if I'm remembering correctly. So why is this? That's the question. And I think there are a couple of reasons why this is. Number one, there's a lot of gun crime. There's this school in Chelsea that went into lockdown. I only have 30 seconds left. There's a school in Chelsea that went into lockdown a couple of weeks ago when gunshots were fired. Gun control needs to be an absolute priority. That's a huge problem. Number two, there is a homelessness crisis, and we need to approach it compassionately and begin by recognizing the people who are primarily harmed by homelessness are homeless people, but we need to get them the services that they need to get them off the streets. And then number three, there's a lot of repeat offenders going out on the streets that commit crimes 20, 50, even 100 times, I've heard, and we need to be able to enable the police to solve that issue so that people aren't committing crimes day after day after day after day.
Thank you, Harris. Joe. I'm going to process not conversation.
Thank you very much. Yes, crime is the number one issue. This is we think it would be the South Bronx or Brownsville would be the number one and number two places of crime. It's right here in our backyard. I think there's many underlying causes, and the primary cause I think is economic. We're giving not enough economic stimulus to the residents to have an alternative. We're not providing enough social services, support services for mental illness and for drugs and drug prevention. And we also need to look at the laws. And in assembly, I think bail reform needs to be tweaked. The statistics on bail reform, I know that there are some studies that say that bail reform is not the reason why people are committing crimes. Here's what I do know. I know that between 2019 and 2021, shootings increased 103%. Homicides increased 53% in overall New York City. Crime is up during that period when bail reform was introduced in 2019. In terms of people that are let out in New York City, there were 39,000 felony arrests from January 1st, 2020 to June 30th, 2021. 39,000. 69% of them were repeat offenders, and 5,000 were rearrested while they were issued bail, and 5,000 people had no bail, and 45% of them were rearrested while they were waiting trial.
Tony, I'm going.
But there's no doubt we have a public safety problem and crisis. As a matter of fact, not just in this city, but across the country. The problems were there before the pandemic. One of the reasons why I decided to run is knowing that we need a safer city. Look, I worked on this before. I'm not new to this, but I worked at the city council with a huge increase in crime due to the recession, due to economics, due to neighborhood block associations being better bonded. The state has funded neighborhood coordinating officers. We put it in our public safety plan we released early on in the campaign. I said this is the #1 issue that we focus on. We need to work with the local police and the block associations to move forward. We also have a mental health crisis. There's no doubt about it that kind of amplifies the problem. We have to do what folks in cities like Denver did, have funding mental health responses. De-escalate the situation. The situation happened this morning while I was meeting voters, and children were going to BS11, and there was a gentleman who was unhinged. You had to de-escalate. I told the parent, let's walk this way. I told the police officer, I think he's just schizophrenic. I'm not a mental health expert. So we should call, de-escalated. Thankfully, nothing terrible happened. But I see it before my own eyes. With thousands of neighbors I've talked to over the last few months. Jason seen it, us walking our dog radar. I think the underlying problems have always been there. The pandemic has amplified it. We need real housing, we need supportive housing, we need to stop the gun running, the flax gun laws on the federal level. We need to trace guns. I'm happy that Brett Marlin and others endorsed our campaign and other electeds have passed more strict gun laws on the state level. We need to work to advocate at the federal level to stop guns coming into the state. Buybacks, that we did when I was at the city council. There are things I've worked on in the past we can do again. But we have to be creative. We have to sit in the room and listen to the folks on the ground. I'm an advocate of organizing my trade. The answer should come from the ground up. I've attended these community councils on the city council, more recently as Kenneth, with Brian and others. We need to listen to them on how we treat folks on addiction and make sure no one is violent on our streets. We need funding psychiatric beds, making sure this institution are violent. Thank you.
Mr. Brown, I'm going to.
Thank you for that question. I'm actually going to answer the question. What's happening here right now is government neglect. The community has solved the issues before. I grew up with those problem solvers. My mother was here today. Joe, who is here today. JD Nolan, Elka Fears. The problem that we have right now is bad policy, and we're doubling down on it. We're turning Midtown South and Midtown North into an unsafe place in the most important central business district in the country, and it's wrong. There are small businesses here who are struggling, and all we do is ask for Hell's Kitchen to sacrifice more and more and more until what? Our neighbors are attacked. I volunteered the second day of petitioning. An Asian American woman, 22 years old, moved to the Hell's Kitchen. She came on board and she was punched in the face by a white woman, right on 43rd and 9th Avenue. When I was at PS11 today, I was speaking to those two officers on 8th Avenue. You know what they told me? They have to recruit more officers themselves. The ad campaigns are not working. They are managing too many responsibilities, and there's not enough police officers. Midtown South and Midtown North are severely understaffed, not just with police officers, but with civilian workers as well. This is wrong. I too have been on those meetings for quite some time with Midtown North Precinct Council South or the 10. And I'm going to tell you, everyone is screaming for help. And the help has to come with an elected official who's not going to double down and say, I can't hear you. I hear you.
Well, I think there needs to be greater enforcement, more police on the ground, greater efforts of hiring and really providing some maybe funding for some of the bids to have security teams and address the better.
Harrison.
I agree with Joe that enforcement is needed, but we've got to get beyond the downstream effects. I'll use Mayor Adams' terminology, the downstream effects which we're seeing on the streets every day, and address the upstream effects before they happen. So not locating all of these entities in the exact same place, not getting to a point where people are committing these crimes and doing drugs on the street is how we really need to solve this issue. So it's addressing the upstream causes, ideally in the long run, but immediately we need to do enforcement to make certain that this issue stops.
Thank you. Chris LeBron.
Quick answers. We have a high concentration of social service providers that are not actually providing social services and healthcare to people that we are using taxpayer dollars to bring into our community. We need audits, not just once a year. It needs to happen now. When the community says there's a spike in crime in Midtown South, the state needs to respond. We need to go into a committee, whether it's the healthcare committee or others, and analyze exactly what we've done wrong to get it right finally. Because I talked.
Tony.
So this has happened in many cities with youth verification hubs, where folks come for social services. We do have a lot of social services in Midtown. I think we need to look at each one to see the audit and look to see if they're being effective. Short term, we have to work with the NYPD that I've done in the past, and the block associations and neighborhood associations to make sure that there's somehow a connection to figure out why are so many folks addicted. I see it every day on my block on 37th. It's gone up tremendously since the pandemic. We need to work on local enforcement, but we have to work with mental health care providers and addiction specialists. We cannot just work with them. We have to work with the coalition to solve this.
Guys.
Good question. So I think it's take a combination of things. We're going to need, is my volume good? It's going to take a lot of things. I think we're going to need, again, it's going to be enforcement. It's going to be maybe have volunteer residents patrolling the areas. It's going to take maybe nonprofits that like the Hells Angels or the
Guardian Angels.
Guardian Angels, thank you. Any group that would patrol the any group that would patrol the streets, Guardian Angels, Hells Angels, it doesn't matter. There needs to be more boots on the ground walking. And I think in terms of the bail reform, we need to give judges more discretion, we're the only state that doesn't allow the judicial discretion in making decisions about bail reform. That and funding from the state for the bids to provide security, more security for boots on the ground.
Tony.
Look, I've seen this firsthand. Hell's Kitchen, that's the York's bid, working with Joe and others. We've seen the mess that was caused in the mayor, so many men, homeless men, that live on one block. First of all, the city and the state have to work with local leaders to make sure whatever policies implemented, they hear from them and not just decide from some bureaucrat in an office. Me being an advocate organizer my entire life, I know how to do that. but I also know how to work on the inside. You have to, when we had hate crimes rise in Hell's Kitchen in Chelsea, we often always call the hate crimes task force to see what they saw. But we would also talk to the whites and get their perspective. Most of the time, the hate crimes are proven. Most of the time, how it happened. You have to be on the ground. Look, there's no doubt we need to fund better enforcement, recruit more police officers, train them better. But we can't just depend on the police to bring down crime. We need to work with mental health care workers. We need to look at the gun problem, specific to the mention of bail reform laws. Crime is up across the country. Some cities, states that have no. So it's great that the governor and the legislature address some of the shortfalls, but legislation is never perfect. You go back and you change it, and you realize it's not working the way you think it should be. But I think we need to look at simple things. When there was an increase in crimes in the last recession, we did simple things like we had the city council have more lights, cut the trees back. We asked block associates, what do you need to feel safe with the block? Sometimes pushing scaffolding to be removed sooner. Practical things we can do. But you clearly only going to solve this problem working with police, mental health care providers, people who are experts on de-escalating the situation, taking guns off the street and helping with the addiction problem. And back to the question before, I think we need to look to make sure that every assembly district has services for addiction stuff. We're not the only district.
Time. Let me go to Chris.
Thank you for that question. I'll start backwards. We'll start with bail reform first. You know, the mayor has proposed a digital algorithm to be adopted for judicial discretion as to whether or not an individual accused of committing a crime should be released based off, and it was based off the program in New Jersey, and it's not working in New Jersey. Quite frankly, any system that, and there is one, any system that causes inequity, which is what you asked, which is black and brown people returning back to jail or being held pre-trial at a higher rate, is irresponsible. We cannot have it. But in Albany, we do need to look at other measures. How do we look at grand larceny is one of the things. And that was a rollback effort done by the majority and by the governor that was adopted over the budget. I'm the only person who's worked in Brownsville, New York. There, they had the Brownsville Safety Coalition. It's a group of tenant associations, resident associations, guilds, and groups of commerce who have come together to work with PSA2 to work on pre-crime, right? This is an opportunity for Hell's Kitchen to marry. Let's look at the Hell's Kitchen Safety Coalition. Let's utilize the great block associations and tenant associations we have now, the professional resources that are in Hell's Kitchen, along with Mid-South Community Court. And let's get on the street and start talking to our high school students that are attending graphic arts and environmental studies and Bayard Rustin and Beacon and doing outreach and doing de-escalation. We're not doing that. But in Brownsville, they did it and it worked. We saw a severe drop in crime, specifically with teenagers and youth. It can be done. I've seen it. I've worked with the Brooklyn DA, Eric Gonzalez, to get it done.
Just want to take a break for a moment for Harrison. Welcome, Leila Lodesico, who joined us. She says she's going to be late. She's here right. She says she's going to be here.
Thank you so much, and apologies for my tardiness. And I will blink the MTA, and I promise that I will work very hard to make our transportation system the 21st century transportation system that we deserve and that definitely we have. So sorry, but
we're going to be back to you for interruption in a second. Harrison, on the question, public safety question.
Yes, so the question is, what do we do on the streets to reduce the increase in crime that's happened over the last couple of years? And to me, the answer is we need to match the resources that we have at our disposal to the problems that are occurring on the streets. And in my view, there are three resources that we have at our disposal. We've got the police, we've got social service providers, and we've got our lawmakers. And for each of those three, it's a different answer as to what we should do. When it comes to our lawmakers, we need to continue to push the envelope when it comes to gun control in this state. I applaud what the governor's done, I applaud what our legislature has done, but we need to do more. When it comes to social service workers, I sit on an advisory council for a local nonprofit that runs homeless service provision. And what I've learned from that experience is that we need to have street outreach teams that are approaching homeless people and offering them the services that they need, rather than having the police do something that isn't within their core competency, which is often how it works today. So we need to equip social service providers to provide those social services on the street and get homeless people into the shelter and get the support that they need. And then when it comes to the police, and this gets back to the question of bail reform, which was wrapped into this broader question, we need to make certain that the police are able to address the crime that's occurring in the street. And I approach bail reform from a similar position to how the governor approaches bail reform, which is that we need to distinguish the two elements of bail reform. One of which is getting rid of cash bail, extremely important for equity purposes, for purposes of racial equality. But cash bail has a history of discrimination. But that's getting wrapped up in a question of how we keep people off the street who are dangerous, who are repeat offenders, pre-trial in jail. And that's a whole separate question that can be addressed at the same time as we get rid of cash bail. And for some reason, this discussion is getting sort of warped. And so when it comes to the police, we need to make certain that people who are arrested for crimes are potentially able to be kept in jail if a judge determines that they are a huge repeat offender or that they are dangerous and shouldn't be released from jail. So 3 types of resources, 3 things we should do.
Thank you very much. We're going to do a quick break on this question. We will follow up. Leila Logisco, introduce yourself. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity. Apologies again for being late. My name is Leila Logisco. I am running for City Assembly in the 75th District. I have been a resident of New York for 25 years. I'm an immigrant. I came here originally from France. By trade, I am a journalist and a reporter. I came actually to the US to pursue better opportunities and more work opportunities, which I was very fortunate to find and embrace. I've done a number of stories on social justice issues, including gun violence. I actually did a film about high school shooting, which was very powerful and gave me of course, experience of the devastation of gun violence. So 17 years ago, I became a member of Community Board 5, and I found a passion in serving the community. It was really something that I came to embrace because I realized that by being on the board, I was able to actually be part of the solution rather than sit and see what was dysfunctional in the community. Very soon after joining the board, I actually was appointed to a leadership role. I became the chair of the education committee. I'm also a mother, and it was very timely as my children were starting their life as school chairman in our public school system. I have fought tirelessly to actually improve our education system, get the adequate funding, reduce class size, and make sure that teachers were receiving the support that they needed from the principal and the school system itself. Currently, I serve as the chair of the Land Use, Housing, and Zoning Committee of Community Board 5. I have been very involved in urban development issues as well as housing. Housing is actually top of my platform. I really believe that there are better ways to deliver affordable housing, that our housing policies are broken and dysfunctional, and this is one of the big reasons why I decided to seek higher office. More recently, I have been very involved in fighting the Penn Station Towers, a proposal that was introduced by ex-Governor Cuomo in 2020 that would call for the raising of 6 state blocks using eminent domain, displacing hundreds of residents and thousands of businesses, a plan that I cannot endorse it. And this is why I'm running for office. Thank you.
Well, first of all, you judge discretion. Someone's violation should not be allowed on the street. Period. So judge discretion. Look, on the issue of bail reform, it's personal to me, no one should sit in jail cell based on their. My dad growing up, had an addiction problem and sat in jail cell for a long weekend, not afford. So bail reform is necessary. We should not conflate violent crimes necessarily over bail reform. It is not the only cause of overseas.
Yes, so there are two things that we're conflating when it comes to bail reform. Number one is getting rid of cash bail, which has a long history of discriminating by socioeconomic status and discriminating by race. We should absolutely get rid of cash bail. At the same time, we should keep people in jail pre-trial who a judge determines are dangerous to the community or who are repeat offenders who are just consistently getting in and out of the justice system and consistently causing crimes on the streets day after day.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you. All right, I'm gonna scream at everyone now. I really do think that that bail has been disproportionately against minorities. There are more minorities in jail for similar crimes just because they're poor, just because they can't afford. I think it's just not right. I think judge discretion is required, it's needed. If someone's dangerous to the community, if there's a risk that they're going to commit a crime, then then the judge should have the discretion to decide on whether to issue bail or not.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, bullet points, real quick. We need to force the NYPD to actually hire civil employees so that we can go through the applications that are coming in, however many they are trickling in, and do the background checks necessary to increase our academy class sizes. Number two, cash bail is a problem. Truly, I'm the only minority in this race. I'm the only Hispanic in this race. I've seen my friends and family been placed in jail because of cash bail. Pre-trial cash bail is offensive.
Leah, you've heard part of this, talking about bail reform.
Yeah.
So 30 seconds on, how would you tweak or make modifications to the current bill?
Yeah, so, I agree with, I think we have consensus here. I think cash bail is unequitable and should not be held, to keep people in jail just because they can't afford to pay the bail. At the same time, I think that repeat offenders need to be very clearly, kept in jail regardless of bail. I think that repeat offenders is what we're dealing with in this community, whether it is a target or with narcotics, and we need to make sure that they are not available to them.
Travis, thank you for that question. What's fair share to me? I don't think it's just fair share for the 5 boroughs, because what I've seen in my time in city council, in Brownsville, in Queens, in Spanish Harlem, and as a lifelong resident here in Hell's Kitchen, is that when we cry for fair share, people call us NIMBYs. We're not NIMBYs. It's always in our backyard. What fair share is a statewide distribution of social services and preventative healthcare measures to those who are suffering from opioid addiction and other drug addiction. That's what fair share is. Specifically, fair share is also a term that we come up with when we talk about other counties in New York State building their fair share of low-income housing by Long Island Railroad stations in their dilapidated main streets and over at Metro North stations. That's what fair share is, okay? So when we look at what happens here in Hell's Kitchen, when we cry for fair share, and our businesses cry for fair share, we're called NIMBYs, we're not. We're trying to save our local economy. We're trying to save the work of generations of people who have lived in this neighborhood and chosen, whether by birth or whether or not they moved here, to call this lovely place home. That's what Fair Share can do for us. And it's essential that your next assembly member emphasize that over and over and over again. We cannot double down on failed policy. I was listening to the BBC the other day, and advocates for harm reduction could not point out where the program has been successful. They tried to point it to Portugal. Portugal. Hell's Kitchen is not Portugal. Seattle is not Portugal. DC is not Portugal. We need to do better. It can't just take a creative double down. We need to go back to tried and true methods to restore the quality of life in our community.
Thank you.
Yeah, so listen, fair share, I think, is something that is very simple. We cannot have clustering. Clustering is what causes the negative impact. So we need to be sure that when we decide programs, we need to make sure that they are at a scale that is adapted for that kind of population. Secondly, we cannot cluster it. What we have today with the concentration of homeless shelters or supported housing is that we're dealing with a population that is very, very often at a high rate addicted to substance abuse sufferers. You're creating basically a captive audience for drug dealers to basically prey on this vulnerable population. This is a bad idea. So what we need to do is make sure that the siting of these facilities that are very important, nobody denies that, everybody agrees, and this community has done more than their fair share, that they are sited in a wise and responsible way. The clustering needs to be avoided, and the large-scale facilities need to be avoided. It has to have a level of integration built in, and that's what fair share is. If you overburden a community, then you are basically creating the problem. And this community has seen it. Those hotels are just too large and too big. And we need to make sure that we break it down. And by the way, calling for quality of life to be restored is not something that should be frowned upon. Very often we're criticized for that, and this is something that I find insulting.
But clearly, the 75th, our website has a big part. We always welcome social services in the 75th. When I worked in city council, we have a big part, and now we're bearing the burden during a terrible crisis, a health crisis, and economic crisis. So I guess I would define fair share by pushing or advocating with the legislature. I would work with other elected officials who I have a close relationship with, working inside and outside of government, to ensure that we have social services in Albany, in Syracuse, not just Midtown Manhattan. To me, fair share means also ensuring that the police have the equipment to figure out mental health crisis and work with professionals so they're not overburdened. Another way, thirdly, I would define fair share is similar to what my opponents had said, is you can't have all social services at only one main transportation hub. You should have them at every transportation hub where folks tend to go looking for services around the state. I would work with the governor's office, who I've worked with in the past. Many of the folks in the governor's office I've worked with on so many private issues about the city council and state that where they're now in senior positions to figure out why only the 75th should bear the burden. So my definition of fair share would be yes, where we can find effective social services to help those in need, we can keep them in the district. Where our social service is not working, or we realize that not audited or is failing, we should look at it and see if another neighborhood needs it and doesn't have those services now, which is happening across the state. It's not just happening in the center. If you look at a lot of states around the state, your transportation hubs, they're having similar problems, not at the grand scale we are having, based on density population and where we live. Thank you. Chris.
Thank you. So I largely agree with what Layla said earlier. I think, to me, we all live in the city because we want diversity. We want diversity of experience and incomes, the types of people that we live around, the types of buildings that we walk around, the types of businesses that we get to experience in our neighborhood. And when it comes to social service provision, that should fit into the character of the neighborhood. And when it trumps the character of the neighborhood, when it surpasses the amount that the neighborhood can bear, that's when you get above fair share. So the fair share that a neighborhood should bear in New York City depends on what that neighborhood is. And if we've got a neighborhood with very large buildings and large population, that neighborhood can bear a larger number of social services. And I think it's probably the case that our Midtown neighborhood can bear more social service provision than a neighborhood that is purely residential, for example. At the same time, we can't bear the amount of social services we've been asked to bear over the last couple of years. One of our earlier questions touched on this. What happens when you locate too many shelters, too many SRO hotels on the same block? Is you're asking for trouble. And so fair share depends on the neighborhood. I think it makes sense for our neighborhood to perhaps have more social service provision than some other neighborhoods that are purely residential, but not as much as we have now. And as Tony said, we've got a big heart, but it's important for our neighborhood to maintain its character and maintain the full suite of diversity that we all live here because of.
Thank you, Joe.
I live on Billionaire's Row on 57th Street. I live in the poorhouse on Billionaire's Row. And there was a shelter proposed by the city on 58th Street, a block from my home. And the outcry from that neighborhood because of this shelter. It has to be fair. The burden has to be shared by every community. It definitely has to be weighted for those communities that have the greatest need to have the greatest shelters, but it has to be spread throughout. It cannot be clustered. It cannot be. So I agree with Harrison and provided.
Okay, so changing the use in a building or in a neighborhood is something that needs to be done very carefully. And I think that, there's a way to do it. It's called rezoning. So if we are going to rezone, then we should do it in a good fair succession. And we should make sure that we understand what is going to come into play and what consequences it's going to have. If we convert a hotel into residential, it's going to bring families, then we need to make sure that the schools are able to support this new influx of population. So yes, I'm in favor of conversions. Yes, I'm in favor of creating more housing, but we have to do it in an orderly and concentrated fashion.
Joe.
I think it needs to be a fair share. It should be spread around throughout the counties. I think this district could, there are 14 or so hotels in the Times Square area that are not open. So there could be hotels converted to homeless shelters. But it does need to be spread around throughout the state.
I would fully support converting hotels to supportive housing, but I think you should also look at ways of using converting hotels to buildings. So all sorts of housing. We have a housing crisis in the West Side. So many of our neighbors have been priced out. You should be able to live and work in this district where you grew up. You shouldn't have to commute hours to get to work. It should not be a playground just for the well-to-do on the West Side of Manhattan. We should work together, but it should be a community-led effort. It shouldn't be just the city or state telling folks we want these hotels out of this sort of housing to share input. We community the neighbors live around, and like my opponent said, ensure there's schools and other services.
So there's a high concentration of shelters and hotel conversions being proposed in CB5. The Paramount Hotel was most recent. When Advocates in Hell's Kitchen went to our elected official and said, why were we not considered? Why were we not brought in? They said CB5 was fine with it. Right across the street from Restaurant Row are small businesses, are treasured blame inappropriate.
Okay, I don't think that you need to respond.
So I believe that there are the two biggest issues in our community right now are safety, which we've talked a lot about, and affordable housing. And when it comes to housing, the law of supply and demand takes effect there as it does everywhere in our economy. If you increase housing supply, you decrease prices. The easiest way to increase housing supply is through converting existing buildings that are unused into housing. So I am absolutely 100% pro enabling conversions from hotels, from unused commercial spaces into housing. I think it's one of the most important things we can do in our district.
So first, just a clarification, CD5 does not support the power line at all.
Can I
Okay,
just,
I don't want to get back to that.
that has not come to Board
That's
5
right.
yet, right?
It was a
There was,
discussion.
there was an application that was withdrawn. We have not had a chance to hear the matter. And when it comes to us, let me make it very clear, Community Board 4 will be invited to weigh in, comment, because that's how we do business with our system.
So look, we're never gonna solve the homeless crisis in the city unless we create more supportive housing. We can't just do it in 75th, we have to do it in every district. In 76, on Upper East Side, the West Village. Look, when I went to the city council, there was an issue with the waste transfer stations. We got beat up for it, but it was the right thing to do. So look, I think I fully support converting hotels to supportive housing. I'm not so sure about shelters. I think we should be looking at true housing. We're never gonna solve this problem as a human being has a door to close behind them. But it has to have full community input. It has to ensure their safety and then also supportive services. Supportive housing never works alone.
Time. Chris, next.
The answer is, I cannot support this bill, and I would not support that conversion.
Joe?
I think it should be fair share. I think that it will partly solve the problem, but it needs to be spread around. It can't be a clustering or concentration. So the bill would probably need to be amended to avoid that.
Listen, it's a bill that comes from good sentiments and that is absolutely flawed. And as a right proposal to actually allow conversion is valid. All right?
But we would never be considering just converting this one hotel into housing for homeless people. So it needs to be taken in its totality of what we're doing with the other hotels in the neighborhood, what we're doing with the other office space, and in coordination with the community, getting community input. So depending on what the community's input is, depending on how we're using other hotels and unused office space, that would factor into my decision.
Thank you. We're gonna move on to support of affordable housing.
Thank you. This, again, is one of the most important questions of this entire debate, in my opinion. Safety and housing affordability are the two most important things facing our community. And when we talk about affordable housing, I think often people think about low-income housing, but it needs to be affordable housing for moderate income people. One of the biggest issues in this district, I believe, is that unless you've got some sort of government support or you're some sort of a finance executive, it's really, really hard to live here. And that applies whether you're low income or moderate income. And the reason, again, why we all live here is because we love our diverse community. It's diverse across a variety of metrics, including socioeconomic status, including jobs. Let's think about Penn South, which was founded by unions 60 years ago to enable moderate income workers to live in the middle of Manhattan. It's one of the most amazing parts of our community, and we haven't built anything like it in 60 years. It's literally celebrating the 60-year anniversary. So when I think of affordable housing, I think of both low income and moderate income housing. And I think building more moderate income housing is one of the most important things we can do. There's a couple things we should be doing to enable more moderate income housing, by the way. One is we need to get rid of the failed 421A tax rate that has largely benefited developers and only produced a small amount of moderate income housing. Number two is we need to make it much, much easier by reducing regulatory barriers and red tape for developers to convert unused hotels and office spaces, as we've talked about, into housing. Because if you increase the housing supply, you reduce housing prices. And again, the easiest way to do that is to convert space that we already have. Diversity is something that we need in this neighborhood. Space is at a premium. And the way that we can use the space that we have and increase diversity by socioeconomic status, job status, is by taking the space that we have, the unused space, and making it into housing.
Joe?
I agree with what Harrison just said. But the other issue is the affordability for a family to live in the city. We have the second highest taxes of any state in the country. The cost of living here is just too high. If you're unfortunate to live in the city and the state, could pay up to 15% of your income in taxes. So we need to address the financial affairs, reduce taxation in the state, spur job creation by lowering regulation, lowering the barriers to farming, and to incentivize development. I think it's supply and demand. We need more housing. We need part hotel conversion. We need part new development, give developers incentives to spur, and we need to think outside the box. We need more joint partnerships, nonprofit, government, as well as private industry partnerships to address housing.
Thank you. Chris?
I'm really excited that we're talking about housing now. Because 37,000 apartments in New York City are being used as illegal hotels, driving up the prices to our rents throughout the 5 boroughs. $3,200 for a 1-bedroom in Hell's Kitchen is insane. I'm the only candidate that's grown up in rent-stabilized housing, and I'm the only candidate that lives in rent-stabilized housing. I'm blessed as a millennial to have that. My friends don't. So what do we need to do? Legislatively speaking, we need to force a vote on good cause rent eviction, which includes the clause that caps the rising of rent on market value apartments. Number 3, New York City is sitting on thousands of apartments that can currently house so much of our historically high homeless population, specifically homeless families. The New York public school system has close to 100,000 homeless students. That's a town of children unhoused. It's unacceptable. Now, as we talk about the future creation of housing, we need to look at empty lots throughout the entirety of the 5 boroughs. We need to look at bad actors, specifically landlords, who are abusing their tenants, and we need to pass TOPA. We need to take over their properties and, as an elected official, press HPD to enact Article 7 as frequently as possible to give tenants the opportunity not just to rent, but to own.
Thank you. Tony?
There's no doubt the middle class has been priced out from the west side of it. We definitely need more moderate housing. We look at AMI. When I worked in the city council, there were times when one spouse made a certain salary, like Harrison referred to before, and the other one was an artist, and they could qualify. You can set it. We need to look at, work with the city and the state, negotiate and figure out how to make it more flexible so folks are priced out. You need to look at co-sponsored cause eviction immediately. You should also look at ways of being creative of maybe renegotiating some of those hotels to be built housing. I think the model should be Penn South, Manhattan Plaza, another affordable co-op city in the Bronx. Where there's a will, there's a way. We need to find lots and create real middle income housing in this district. We should do it yesterday.
Yeah.
All right, I think I have a slightly different view on housing than my colleagues here on stage. I don't think that there's a supply and demand issue. We've had plenty of supply. We've had plenty of new construction. We've actually never issued so many permits as I think like 2 years ago. What we see is that the rent keeps going higher and higher and higher, and therefore bringing more supply is not creating the response that we need. Our housing policies are failing. What we need to do is actually realize that we're not dealing with housing, we're dealing with speculation. Developers are building in New York City not to provide housing, but to get a return on their investment. And guess what? They're very good at it. So what we need to do is put policies in place so that we cut through the speculation. And the way to accomplish that is for the government, the state plays a huge role in there, to actually purchase the land. and then build buildings, and go with the model of the limited equity co-op, such as Penn South. This is a great model, and it's been noted on the stage. It was meant as an experiment. It was widely successful and never repeated. Hello, let's do it again. And let's bring true sound housing policies, because the current ones, the 421A, does not work. It does not generate the amount of units that we need. And once again, in our district, the vacancy rate is 11%. This is twice as high as the rest of the city. On Billionaires Row or Hudson Yards, 30% vacancy rate. So obviously, it is not a supply and demand issue. It is an issue of cutting through the speculation so that we can go back to housing.
Certain individuals need to be institutionalized, and we need to increase the funding for it, like psychiatric beds. I said that in our public safety plan. You must increase funding for psychiatric beds. If there's a violent person, schizophrenic, that supportive housing wouldn't help. That person should be in an institution. We should also look at ways to figure out how do we identify that population. Look, a lot of the folks who've committed these horrible things, the system failed. So we need to look at, like, exactly like you said, support housing is only one part of the solution.
We'll get everybody for it, because it's a complex question. Joe?
I do think that if someone's a harm to themselves or the community, they should be taken care of, and they should be institutionalized. And it is a complex question, and you're going to have to approach it from many solutions, many avenues. But social services, increased spending in social services is definitely necessary.
Chris?
So, I had to take my previous answer, and I want to make it very clear that we have a housing problem, we have a warehousing problem. Precisely, we have an enforcement problem with DOT and HPD. Now to the question, do I support this? It's different. It's a difficult yes answer, because there's a gray. We truly have to consider the constitutional rights of those citizens. And previously, we failed to acknowledge them and provide them their full rights when we were institutionalizing individuals with severe need. So there needs to be buffers. We need to consider the human aspect of the ask, and then double down on the funding.
I think it's an issue of accountability. So, I think that it's actually inhumane to leave these individuals in the street. There's nothing humane about it. And at the same time, institutionalizing an individual against their will is a decision that cannot be made lightly. So we have to find ways to provide the help and the care for these severely ill individuals, including making sure that they have access to healthcare, which a lot of these individuals don't, and this is also where we're failing them, and making sure that these institutions that are going to care for these individuals are highly accountable.
Yeah, so I sit on the advisory board for a nonprofit that provides supportive services to homeless people. So the way that I approach this issue is through thinking about what the experience is like for those people. A lot of people who end up on the streets, I believe most people who end up on the streets have been failed by broken relationships, broken trust, systems that have let them down time and time again throughout their lives. And they've been left in a place where they lack self-confidence often, they have mental health issues, they have drug addiction issues. But if you approach this question from the premise that these are human beings whose society has failed, and you recognize that these are people who really need help, because as Layla said, the situation that they're currently in is not a good one for them, beyond not being a good one for the community, then I think you can arrive at a solution that provides people with the help they need, whether that's institutionalization or not, and recognizes their core humanity and doesn't take away their rights, as Chris was referencing.
let's see, I'm not sure of every jurisdiction that has, besides Colorado and Massachusetts, California, I'm not familiar with other states that have.
Oregon.
Oregon, New Mexico.
Okay, so, I think that it has to be regulation. It has to be, limits on hours. And it really comes back to patrolling and enforcement and boots on the ground. What is the regulation for the limits on the hours that these stores could operate? They have like a, like a liquor store license, there has to be restrictions on how close it should be to various institutions, schools, and churches, and et cetera. I think it's enforcement and boots on the ground.
Tony? I think if you look at other cities, Colorado seems to have better transition to legalization of marijuana. LA had similar problems New York is having now. Where we're in a weird gray area. It's been legalized, but folks are already starting to sell it, and there's no enforcement. Folks selling it illegally before the law has passed. I mean, they have to be regulated like stores. Like in LA, you go into a store and they have to have a license. They have to know the amounts they're selling. They can't just sell on the street. It can't be still the way it is now. So in New York, like I'm not in favor of these trucks that drive around the neighborhoods. No one knows the amount of marijuana in the marijuana. They're not being regulated. Nobody knows if it's real marijuana. It's a nuisance on the streets for neighbors. I think we have to look at other cities to see where it's worked, like Colorado, which worked much better in LA transition to legalization of marijuana. Regulation, enforcement, if someone's breaking the law and not following specifically how it should be sold and hours, regular business hours, not 24/7. And look, there's still a black market we have right now. Clearly, there's a demand for the supply throughout the city, and there's no one minding the overall environment. It's kind of a mess right now. You see it by my house on 37th and 10th. You're not supposed to be able to not buy it on the street anymore. You're supposed to buy it in the store. When you see these trucks, you're not sure if what's happening with these individuals on the corner buying it from a deli under the counter, because everyone is trying to get in on the business. So it needs to be regulated. It needs to be allowed to be enforced by the police and by others to make sure that it's being sold. Similar to what Colorado, which had a much better transition to legalization from, which I fully support, but it needs to be sure it's not a nuisance.
Yeah, so, the state is actually figuring out how these dispensaries are going to operate. So that's why right now it's not really in gray areas, is that, the rules have not been established. So hopefully, they will, and I think that, we can take our cues from the SLA. I'm not suggesting for a second that the SLA is doing a wonderful job, but it is based on some pretty sound principles. The first one is, it's a privilege. Selling and buying alcohol is a privilege. The same holds true for cannabis. So it needs to be done in a careful way. We should not cluster. Don't cluster. Make sure that you're spread out. Make sure that you have, your 500-foot hearing and you don't have a concentration of these establishments. Make sure that they're sited away from certain sites, such as religious institutions, schools. We can take our cues from the SLA. The rule of the SLA is a good basis. And I think that we need to make sure that we are not creating a negative consequence to the community.
Yeah, so I think the easiest way for me to approach this issue is chronologically. So let's start with the rollout of this new policy, then we'll talk about licenses, and then let's talk about ongoing enforcement. When it comes to rollout, this is an area where the policy has been botched, I believe, and I think my experience in the federal government and the state government will make me a more effective policymaker here. We've got a situation where cannabis dispensaries are going to be legal. They're going to be enabled to sell cannabis in the future, but they can't right now. And yet, on my block, there are 2 or maybe 3 new dispensaries that have opened up in the last couple of months. And it's got to be the case that some of them are selling marijuana. I know that there's been reporting all up and down the Upper West Side that there's dispensaries selling marijuana right now, and it's not yet legal. And Tony called it a gray area. I don't know what it is. It's a rollout that doesn't make sense, and I think is setting us up to fail in the long run because there's a lot of rule breakers that are operating right now, and that's how we're getting started. You want to start off on the right foot, and I don't think that's what we're doing. After rollout, we get to licensing once these things are legalized. And I agree largely with Layla that we could follow an SLA type model, although ideally better, with more enforcement, unannounced inspections, that sort of thing. But the community does need to be engaged during the initial licensing process to make certain that we don't end up in a situation like I have on my block, where there's 2 or 3 dispensaries all next to each other. We don't end up in a situation, as Joe was referencing, where there's one right next to a school, where the community's input is really involved, and where there's a high barrier to being granted a license. Because as Layla said, I think it should be a privilege. And then finally, you get on to ongoing enforcement, and that's where really the unannounced inspections come in. It's where making certain that we are fully regulating and enforcing the rules that we've set up comes in. Because if people aren't operating the way that we should be operating when they've been granted the privilege of selling cannabis, then their license should be revoked, and we should be monitoring that on an ongoing basis.
Thank you, Christopher.
So I'm gonna be really corny right now. Let's get into the weeds on cannabis. The permit process and the priority application process on permits is going back to what you were talking about earlier, equity. Individuals who have previously been arrested for the sale of cannabis. Secondly, minorities and women-owned business owners and entrepreneurs. Those are the priorities right now. And what we're seeing throughout the 75th Assembly District are people taking away the value of holding that permit before the permit is actually been handed to them. These individuals are being cheated again by bad policy, cart in front of the horse. And there is no way to roll that back right now. And there is no way for the NYPD to police it. We just talked about the lack of ability of the NYPD currently to police issues like opioid use in Midtown South. Now, when we look at marijuana trucks, they're nothing new. Nothing new. They have been around for at least 15 years in the Times Square area, and there's been no solution for it. On occasion, NYPD traffic will tow and will go to the pound. And I've seen the pound, and I've seen 20, 30, 40 of these vans, and they come back. There's no legislation solution in sight for this. What we need to do is prioritize protecting those women and minority-owned applications and permits, because those individuals deserve a right to make a living of the cannabis market, and New York State benefits from the taxation of real cannabis sales.
Yeah, I think this is what happens when you botch a rollout and you haven't thought through what the policies that you're setting up are going to lead to. And the answer is you go back and you rewrite the rules. Turns out people have found a loophole that I don't think policymakers expected. But there's a way to resolve it. You simply ban exactly the practice that you're describing. Done.
Joe?
I think the undercover cops would be the way, not with a badge or anything. You know, totally undercover, going into stores, trying to buy weed.
Yeah.
Listen, it's very simple. Distribution of marijuana, whether you pay for it or you don't, is not legal. So, let's enforce that. And then let's speed up the rollout of the actual licensing program.
Chris?
The state took the effort to do this. This falls on our New York State troopers to enforce, point blank and period. Now, we can go and address it legislatively, but what's the point? It's here, it's not stopping. The practice is there. The individuals eventually will get permits to sell it legally. It will be legal to sell. It's already legal to hold, okay? So it's just, we're at a place right now where once again, if it's a problem in your community and you want to call it out, use your block associations and start doing a survey and start handing that over to your community board and your local city councilman.
Tom.
I mean, look, we have to enforce the fact that illegal sales happen. We have to regulate it. Like everyone else said, the rollout is launched. We have to relook at it and figure out a different way. It's not affecting it so bad the way it is right now. And I think you need to look at it 3 ways. Number one, find all the businesses that, are breaking the law, whether you increase funding from the state, maybe not legislatively, since already passed and legalized. Number two, work with the block associations and NYPD and the bids to figure out where it's happening, to target the folks that are breaking the law. And then figure out when the well is
Time.
actually legal, how we prevent this in the
Still
future.
time.
So when we look at Hudson Yards, I think everyone needs to first look at the fact that money was taken away from Black and brown communities to develop this monstrosity, this failed urban project. And anybody happy that it exists simply has to look at the ghost land that is Hudson Yards and that will be the Western Rail Yards. Promises were made to communities, specifically in CB4, Hell's Kitchen in Chelsea. And they're not being kept. When I look at Penn Station and the idea that came out of Cuomo's office and now Governor Hochul's office was we're going to give tax dollars to the very, very wealthiest developers. They're going to get new air rights. We're going to use eminent domain and we're going to use Robert Moses tactics to solve a Robert Moses forced problem. This is how you're going to get your brand new Penn Station. But wait, you're not going to get that money until we have leases on the corporate space. And there's no guarantee for residents who are removed from their home to come back to their home. We've seen that before in Hell's Kitchen. It's wrong. So how do we work this as an assembly member? One, we are not using tax dollars to fund the ego trips of the wealthiest developers. That is the most important thing. Hell's Kitchen and Chelsea suffer when our elected figures and our executive branch throws us under the bus. And we've seen it now for nearly a century.
Harrison.
I think we all agree on this panel and probably all of us in this community that Penn Station is not a great place to be. It should be redeveloped.
No, it's the worst.
No, it's the worst. You just heard it. You heard it here first. Penn Station is the worst. But the current plan to redevelop Penn Station is ridiculous. We need to develop a train station. What we don't need is what's being proposed right now, which is, as we've heard, enabling a private developer to build a bunch of office towers, which I don't think any of us believe we need, given how many unused office towers we have right now. Using the government's powers of eminent domain to relocate people, to destroy historical buildings, and providing an undefined amount of tax breaks to these developers to do all of that in exchange for some sort of investment in the future in redeveloping Penn Station that is too undefined. And so you're left with the situation where we don't know the public costs, although we know they're going to be significant, and we don't know the public benefits. And we don't know if those are going to be significant. And I think all of us in this community have learned what happens in a situation like that. And Hudson Yards is a perfect comparison when, in exchange for getting some support for Hudson Yards, we were promised an MTA, that the MTA site, which exists just a couple of blocks from here, was going to be developed into affordable housing. The city, years later, has gone back on its word, and we can't make the same mistake again. We can't agree to funding development now in exchange for a promise that's going to be broken later.
We all agree on this tonight that we don't need a second estimate. And the current plan for Penn Station is not a transportation. It's a development. It's a plan, it's a giveaway to Bernie. We don't need 10 office towers. We need to relook at it and have a real transportation plan. I think we all agree on that. We need to look at through running like we had in Paris and Pittsburgh. I wrote an op-ed in Gotham Gazette, the train's not ready to leave the station. I stood with activists and others. We have to fight on the outside, whether it's protesting, or on the inside, negotiating with folks at the governor's office and the mayor's office. This plan is unacceptable. You don't need to use eminent domain. If you build from within and figure out how we move Madison Square Garden. I know it won't be easy, but that has to be the equation. And we have to have real affordable housing. We can't have peanuts promised to Berkeley that will never happen in Madison Square Garden. And we have to look at it from the street state. And I know there's a public realm advisory committee, the governor and the mayor have agreed to, we have to make sure there's full transparency, actually see how this plan is being financed. The IBL even came out with a study showing that the financing for true transportation plan is not there. Look, we all agree, Penn Station is hell. We deserve a first-rate transportation hub like Washington DC, Paris, and other great cities. This plan is not it. We should all work together regardless of the outcome of this election to stop the current plan, change the plan, and ensure there's real affordable housing, a real transportation system that you don't have to connect to 5 different trains to cross town or to New Jersey or wherever you're going.
Thank you, Joe.
So the question was, how do you ensure that the developer follows through with everything? I think that tax benefits or abatements.
And the government, both.
Okay, I'll start with the developer. I think the tax abatements and incentives have to be contingent, have to be performance-based. If you're not following, if you promised to develop affordable housing and you didn't follow through, then take away those tax. I think to hold the government accountable, there's no transparency. We don't really know what the Penn Station plan, how it's going to be financed. We don't know the numbers. IBO said it. There wasn't enough information. There has to be greater transparency. There has to be more accounting. I remember what a CPA saying has to be more accounting. There has to be more accounting for this project, more transparency, so we know exactly how this is being held. Someone has to be held accountable.
All right, so I think the question was how would we as assembly members go about this project? Okay, so, I think we all agree the plan is not good, we need a better Penn Station, so I'm gonna tell you how we get there, because I don't think my opponents were really able to articulate that. The first thing we need to understand is that President Biden passed the bipartisan infrastructure law last year. There is a big pool of federal money. This project is eligible up to 80% to receive federal funding. The tower plan, which once again is not the train plan, it's just the towers, is sold to us as a bogus excuse as we need the money and these towers are going to create money. The reality is that we don't need the money. The feds have already told us they're going to pick up 80% of the tab, which means that New York is on the hook for, good news, only 10% because New Jersey is partnering with us. We know that it's in the charter of our agreements. So now New York needs to pick up 10% of the tab to fix Penn Station. The value capture that is sold to us from these towers is actually, when we do the math, going to be a liability. I requested last year for IBO, through the committee board, to actually do this report. And they came with it, and it is a standing report that shows that it is actually, it bears the risk of being a liability to the tune of billions of dollars. So what do we need to do? We need to kill this plan. How do we kill it? We need to use the power of the Public Authorities Control Board, the PACB, which is the only legislative component that is going to have a bite into this project, so that we retire the project, we work with our federal partners to make sure that they deliver on the 80%. We work in New Jersey to make sure that they are still in with us. And then we sign a check for the balance. New York is a wealthy state and we can do it.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the answer is simple. We should relocate Madison Square Garden, period.
Give us a where.
Give you a where.
Some ideas.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, it doesn't really matter to me. We can move it out to an outer borough, but it shouldn't be sitting on top of one of the biggest transportation hubs in the biggest city in the country. Doesn't make any sense. The sports stadium can be located anywhere. It doesn't need to be here. Transportation hub does need to be located here. And so it doesn't, the compromise that we're making doesn't make sense. I'll stop there.
Joe.
Yeah, Madison Square Garden has been a problem. I know there's been much talk about the tax exemption that they have. I do think this is a perfect example of where Albany has failed to have someone all sports dealers, all sports stadiums, from Buffalo to Madison Square Garden, should be, a framework should be developed to consider subsidies and exemptions for all sports fields. Where should the new Madison Square Garden go? You know, I don't know. I have not, a study should be done.
Chris.
Sunnyside Yards. It is the best in Queens, on the 7th train, right? It is the most underdeveloped open land, and we've proven in Brooklyn, in Clinton Hill, that we can build Barclays Center and build buildings over the Atlantic Yards cut. It needs to be in Sunnyside Yards. They need to take on their burden. They refuse to currently. It needs to be in Sunnyside Yards.
Okay, so there are discussions actually currently between the Goldmans and related to actually move MSG to the Western Yards, okay? Will it happen? Is it a good plan? It could be. It has to be, you know, studied very, very carefully. New Jersey can be an option. The Goldmans don't want to hear about it. New Jersey would be happy to actually have the state. There has been some discussions about actually moving it east side, which also could be an option.
Time.
It's clear we have to move Madison Square Garden. You cannot redevelop Penn Station without moving it. As far as the answer to where, I think we'd have to study it. I mean, I would before moving it to the borough. Look, we'd have to talk to different communities, see where it would work. I would have to see the data. I couldn't just guess where it would be a great spot to go. Clearly, the west side of Manhattan probably would not welcome the stadium after Hudson River. Which I was part of, stopping the West Side Stadium. It wasn't just one entity that stopped that. It was a coalition of us who stopped it, and we knew it would not be good for the neighborhood.
Well, I'm a very effective listener. When I solve a problem, I always enlist all of the participants, all the stakeholders, and get their opinion. I would have my office here in this district would reach out to the community. I would attend all of the community board meetings. I would attend all of the community events. I would have, everyone would have my cell phone. I'd be very reachable and very approachable.
You know, I'm the only candidate here who has 17 years of experience on the community board. I chair a committee, and Joe can attest to it because we serve on the same board. I've been resolutions that are voted unanimously month after month after month after month. I know what it takes to convince, to educate, and to make sure that we bring consensus. I have proven it year after year after year, and this is the only way we get an outcome that is actually satisfying to the entire community. And I intend to do exactly that in something.
Chris.
So I think we're ignoring something right now, is that the 75th is one of the most gerrymandered assembly districts in all of New York State. I was just recently endorsed by Citizens Union, and in my endorsement, rather, as their preferred candidate, pardon me, in this race, they listed all the neighborhoods in the 75th. First things first, 2024, we need new lines immediately. They need to make sense. We, the Hell's Kitchen Democrats, and CB4, and Chelsea Reform Democratic Club, and the block associations on the west side, called for a district that was inclusive of a portion of San Juan Hill, the theater district, Hell's Kitchen, and Chelsea. We've built coalitions before, but on day one, as I promised on the first time that I did this forum, it's been probably 7 now, we need to have a district meeting, and we need to bring in our block association leaders, our tenant association leaders, and we need to make a habit of it. Because I was endorsed by pardon me, I was endorsed today because I believe in transparency, because I believe in good government. And right now, our doors are not open by our elected officials. As your next assembly member, it is my obligation to go to your door and show you that my door is open and host you and bring in your ideas and start building policy that truly works. We're not doing that right now.
Tony?
I think why I stand out in this race is I've worked inside and outside of government building coalitions my entire adult life on the West Side. Whether it's passing marriage equality, we work with the business community, we work with local activists on the West Side Stadium, I work with the block associations, I also was on community board 4, then with Joe, with many others. I've never assumed I had all the answers on my own. I've always gone to experts, whether it's mental health that we dealt with when I was at city council. It's not a new problem. I would be the most acceptable family member. I've been like that way all my career. I think the reason why I have the endorsements, incumbent Dick Gottfried and all the unions so far who waited in the race, and so many advocacy organizations, they know me. They know I will work my heart out for every constituent in this district. I won't be beholden to any special interest, not one interest directly related to any state projects, and not any one interest because of a donation. I will work for every constituent in the district, and the folks who endorse me know that. And that's why I feel on June 28th, I hope I'm humble enough to earn your support and your vote, because I think the people who know me well, Joe, I've worked with you, I've worked with others in Chelsea, know that I'm a straight shooter and I'll work my heart out for every constituent regardless of where you sit. And I think government should be the voice of the voiceless, not the one to do on the West Side. That's what we need government to do. And you can't come to a solution without working with block associations or the police or government. I've worked inside and outside of government. I'm an advocate, I'm an organizer by trade.
Harrison?
Every job I've ever had has involved one core thing, which is listening to others. And so the short answer to this question is, I believe I'd be an effective representative for our community because of my skills of listening that I've developed over my entire career. In the Obama administration, part of my job was listening to members of the public come in and tell us how a new regulation is going to affect their lives. In the private sector, my job has been to listen to business leaders tell me what problems they're facing in growing their companies, investing in their workforces, addressing a new competitive dynamic, and fully understanding what they're describing in order to arrive at a solution that leads to economic growth. And when it came to my position on the Reimagine New York Commission, my job was to listen to New Yorkers describe how the pandemic was affecting their lives and to try to arrive at a new solution that was going to lead to better lives after the pandemic. And the way that I've approached each of those entities, federal government, private sector, state government, is through listening to complex sets of stakeholders, understanding the problems that people face, aligning together, envisioning on the ultimate goal that we're trying to pursue, and then working together to achieve that goal. And I think we've seen it on this campaign as well. One of our opponents dropped out, Will Kern, the former community board chair of CB4, and endorsed me because he got to know me. I see Henry, Chris's dad, who I've gotten to know a tiny bit over the course of this campaign. But I feel like we've all gotten to know each other, which is, I think, emblematic of the types of people that we are. And for me, at least, the type of person that I would be as a representative in this community, as someone who really tries to get to know people, listen to problems, arrive together at solutions, and work towards what those solutions are.
So what's really unique, once again, I'm gonna go back to the gerrymandered assembly district that we have right now, which actually doesn't represent the make of Hell's Kitchen, which is 51% minority. The largest minority population are Asian, American, and Pacific Islanders, the AAPI community. They have brought us back to the true masala of life that I grew up with. Second is the Hispanic community, the African-American community, and the LGBT community. Once again, the best way to build out coalitions, to do a listening tour, is to address our district lines, to go out on the streets, as I've done every day in this campaign. Just take a look at Ninth Avenue where you see my posters inside small businesses. I'm there for you.
Thank you. Joe?
I will reach out to all of the stakeholders, all the communities, all of the organizations, have a dialogue, and really, for me to make effective legislation, I would need their input. They'll bring to my attention things that I was not aware of, and I will reach out to every single constituent in this district. Thank you.
So the very first thing I will do is actually open up my constituents' office on the ground floor. Has to be open, has to be at street level, has to have weekend hours, late hours. We need this office to serve the constituents. But more broadly, what I would do is actually reach out to those communities. This community is actually very well organized. This is the beauty of it. You know, very, very well organized, and it is fantastic. It is beautiful. So I would reach out to these organized groups and invite them and listen to them. You know, it's not about me telling them what I'm doing. It's about listening to what they have to say.
I would use the same style I've used throughout this campaign, why I've earned endorsements of so many elected officials and organizations and all the unions. The same way I did my entire career as a city and state governor, in the state senate. I would reach out to the folks on the ground, the block associations, the community boards, to see what they're hearing and seeing, whether it's on public safety, on healthcare. Look, all these complex problems are not easily solved, but you can't do them alone. I've done that my entire career on marriage equality, on public safety. I've worked, I'm not new to this. I've been in this community, serving the West Side my entire adult life.
Thank you.
I think that the way to approach this issue is to be out there. Because I talked to a lot of people on the streets over the last couple of months. I've invested a huge amount of time standing outside street corners, talking to thousands of neighbors. And the number of people who even know, the portion of people who know who their assembly member is quite low. And so, yes, we could open offices, but I think it's a small part of the community that comes to those offices that seeks out our local government support. And so really you have to meet them where they are. And I would do that the same way that I run this campaign, by being out on the street, standing outside subway corners, standing outside grocery stores, standing outside.
Time.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for hosting today. You know, this has been an incredibly unique opportunity for a kid born and raised here. The last 6 months have been enriching. I have made new friends. Harrison, it's been a pleasure. And Joe, getting to know more about you has been absolutely fantastic. My sister actually went to Iona College, and my father grew up just outside of Power Memorial in San Juan. This election is historic, not because an individual served for 52 years, but because we need to activate solutions in a pandemic, a once in a century pandemic. Our economy has fallen flat. Our public services are missing. Our safety, you've heard it. It's not something that we can actually rely on anymore. I've walked up and down this district at least twice a week, from 70th Street and Columbus Circle down to 16th Street and Fifth Avenue, getting to know every crevice. Yeah, there are endorsements that have come in from unions that have never asked any of my fellow candidates to put in questionnaires and interview. Leadership has decided to threaten funding and contracts, and those endorsements have come in. I have the endorsements of my neighbors, of small businesses, block association leaders and tenant association leaders.
Time.
Vote for me.
Harrison,
Just 1 minute.
1 minute, please.
Yes, 1 minute.
Thank you.
And you, by the way, Alden, very good on. So thank you.
Instinct after so many Zoom forums, but tonight really has been unique. This is the first and probably the only time that all of us are going to get together to debate. Thank you all in the audience for coming. Thank you all, the audience on Zoom, for listening. Thank you guys for hosting. I think that our neighborhood is in crisis as we figure out how to recover from the pandemic. There's been an economic downturn that has led, and remote work that has led to depopulation of our streets, that has led to safety issues, it's led to vacant storefronts. And in order to confront that, in order to figure out how the city is going to recover from the pandemic, we need a thoughtful, competent policymaker to go up to Albany and make policy to help us. And that is what I bring to the table. I started my career in the Obama administration. More recently, I worked with the governor's office in New York doing pandemic recovery and leading the Reimagine New York Commission's efforts as our staff lead on workforce development, support for small businesses, and support for the arts. My experience in the federal level and the state level, the public sector, my experience as a lawyer and business side of the private sector will make me a policymaker who can help our neighborhood recover from the pandemic. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to thank the coalition for including me. They didn't have to in this. I am on the ballot in November, so please don't forget to vote for Mafia. It's very hard to forget that name. The one thing that really wasn't focused on today, and it's probably the number one or number two issue in this, will be in this state, and that's the financial affairs of the state of New York. We have the second highest income tax rates in the country. We, during the pandemic, we're the only state that increased taxes and then wondered why over 300,000 people left the state, left the city. So it's the financial impact. I don't have to tell you what's impacting your pocketbook with inflation. Unemployment is still 6% when the rest of the country is 3%. I don't have to tell you about the economic breaking of the Federal Reserve and how interest rates have increased. We're going to have a financial crisis in Albany. And I just need 10 more seconds. The budget that Hochul had passed, yes, it's balanced. It omits over $100 million using accounting gimmicks, $100 billion using accounting.
Those are 10 times. Thank you. Seriously. Tony.
Look, the pandemic is what made me want to run for office. I realized, look, this is not new. Like I said earlier before, I've been serving the West Side communities my entire adult life. And I'm one of the few up here today, I earned endorsements because they've seen my work. I reached out to them and I decided to run. I reached out to district leaders I work with when Manhattan Plaza was threatened when I was the city council. These are problems I've worked on my entire adult life. That's why I'm running for this assembly. I want to create a more livable, equitable, safer city for every New Yorker, not just the well-to-do. I'm not running for this office for a fancy title. I'm literally running to solve people's problems that I've been doing my entire adult life. These problems aren't easily solvable. No one of us can wave a wand and stop Penn Station. Only broad, calm, diverse coalitions can do that. And I've done that my entire career. So I hope to earn your support. I'm humbled by this process. I've enjoyed this process and thank you for the coalition, all the important work you do. I know your work from day one.
Later.
All right, thank you so much for the opportunity. It was really a pleasure to be with my opponents up on the stage in person. Listen, you know, I have 17 years of experience on the community board. I've been dealing with these issues. I am an avid reader, including of the budgets. I know how to read it. I know how to negotiate it, because that's what we do. And we are faced with tremendous issues that are looming, whether it is the MTA and its budget that is catastrophic, or Penn Station that needs to be upgraded, and a plan that is absolutely terrible that I've been dealing with for the past 2 years. If someone knows what is in this project, it's me. I've read it cover to cover, 2,000 pages, including the appendixes. We need someone who goes to Albany, who understands the issues. And I am the only qualified candidate tonight, and I hope that we'll earn the trust of voters. What is in front of us is really serious. We can't get it wrong. Whether it is housing, transportation, healthcare, we need someone with experience.
Thank you.